So these are our two small 40-foot long windrows that we set up to blow. Like I discussed in a previous video, we've got wood chips on the bottom, about a 1-foot layer bed of wood chips to help the air percolate up through these two 40-foot long windrows that were made out of composting bedding back material, a little bit of fresh manure, and wood chips and leaves that were chopped up from a tree trimming service. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was that when a compost pile breaks down, an aerated compost pile breaks down, the process itself is initially bacterial, primarily bacterial. So there's a lot of nitrogen, food sources, and the bacteria take off, plenty of air because it's either being turned, or in this case we're going to blow it with a jump tent blower, and that causes the pile to heat. Later on, and of course, you know, the rule is with a actively turned pile, it needs to heat to actually technically 131 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 days. If it's a static pile, like these two, and this one here, we later covered in wood chips, and this one here, after blowing it about a week, like I commented elsewhere, we covered it with a tarp after treating it with a Jerry Gillespie mix of anaerobic microbes to get it jump started, and then put tires on it to hold the plastic down. But anyway, getting back to the microbial action in the pile, initially it's bacterial, the pile heats, and then after that process, the pile cools down to around maybe 80 degrees Fahrenheit or so, and it becomes primarily a fungal process. Now, if the pile's turned, the fungi never really get a good hold, and so the process primarily remains bacterial in nature, and that is not recommended for example, if you're going to use an extract to treat your seeds in furrow. So I wanted to show you this chart from the University of California Cooperative Extension. See if I can find that. Yeah, discussing the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So in previous videos, I mentioned that we were shooting to a 40-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, and we've gotten recommendations from other people trying the Johnson Su, aka the BEAM method, B as in boy, EAM compost, to use 40% green material, 40% brown, and have 20% of that brown be actually small wood chips, and then 20% manure. Other people like from Farmville Bot have recommended 25% manure, preferably from chickens or cows, 25% hay or other dried green material, 25% fresh green material like grass clippings, and 25% chopped corn. Now, what's interesting is I just watched a video with Jay Young, who's a great guy, farmer out west. He runs the Young Red Angus farm, and he had a video that he did with David Johnson, his wife, Hui-Chun Su, I guess that's how it's pronounced. And Professor Johnson, who, of course, he and his wife came up with the Johnson-Su method to make highly fungal compost, commented that he didn't care what the carbon to nitrogen ratio was, and that he has made compost with a carbon nitrogen ratio of up to 100-to-1. So In terms of our bedding back material, I have to say that when there isn't enough nitrogen, enough fresh manure, the bacteria in the pile. So if we've got, composted bedding back material that's been sitting all winter, and then it goes out into windrows, and the windows don't get turned right away, some of them may not start to heat very well. So if we put in some fresh alleyway scrapings, so basically straight cow manure into the pile and mix that in, initially it helps the piles, what I say, fire up, or in other words, the bacterial action to get going. And of course, if the pile is too rich in nitrogen, which, if you got too many greens or too much fresh manure, the bacterial action is just going to take off like crazy. And if you're turning piles, you're going to need to get in there and turn them and have a watering system so that you can put water on them to cool them down. That, or you can try and add more brown matter into the pile and turn them to get them to cool down. But if they go too hot, above 160 degrees Fahrenheit, they're going to actually kill beneficial microbes, along with, of course, like weed seeds and pathogens and stuff like that. But those get killed out at, 131 degrees Fahrenheit and below. So, yeah. In terms of the compost in these piles, from this chart from the University of California Cooperative Extension, we estimated that our aged 6-month-old bedding pack manure to be around 10 to 1. So with that, then, we decided to add in some wood chips and other shavings from a tree trimming service, so leaves and small twigs and stuff like that, which has a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 400 to 1. And if you actually go to Cornell University, they have information on carbon to nitrogen ratios. In particular, they have these tables that you can look up, the carbon to nitrogen ratio on a weight basis, which is how this needs to be done, and figure out what the carbon to nitrogen ratio of the particular materials you're using. And so we did that, and we figured out how many skid steer loads we need to add of the wood chips, like I discussed in other videos, to get us to around 40 to 1. Did we need to do that? I'm not sure. The wood chips certainly help with aerating the pile as well, and I think that's important. Some of this bedding pack material can get pretty compact. Of course, we turned it once with the windrow turner or compost turner, and that does help. So, as I think about this and listen to David Johnson in particular, his various videos, but in particular the one with Jay Young, where he said they're not that concerned. They're concerned with materials being too small or too much green, too much nitrogen, materials that can compact and so on, like green grass clippings they were talking about. But not so much with the carbon to nitrogen ratio. My personal feeling is that in what we're going to try to do differently, because we didn't have the best results with this round of Johnson Su, which we did use composting bedding back material. I'll talk about that in a later video, as well as, like I said, wood chips and other materials, green materials from leaves that were chopped up from the tree trimming service. So my opinion, after seeing what we got, which was a decent fungal count, and again, I'm going to do some videos on that, but not nearly as high as we had hoped for, that we're going to try to sort of mimic what you would find on a forest floor. So our new batch, and I'll try and do a video of that later on, of Johnson Su is going to be very small chipping, wood chips and leaf material, as well as a lot of brown leaves, which I guess we're gonna run it through a chipper to kind of break them up a little bit, and a smaller amount, maybe, I don't know, 20% of composting bedding bank material, to try and kind of, like I said, it's the nitrogen-based materials that get that bacterial action going initially, and we need that to kill pathogens. So that's what we're going to try. With our new Johnson Su batch, and I guess I'll call it quits on that. I just wanted to do a video basically on carbon to nitrogen ratios and what I learned and how it relates to creating a fungal compost, and in particular to, and also some discussion on the Johnson Su highly fungal compost.